Capitalism is something that's grossly misunderstood, and I just recently was recommended to check out Ryan Hibbs' video on why capitalism is bad. And again, much like that of Joe Scott, Second Thought, Vicky 1999, and all these other socialists, they really don't understand the first thing of what they're talking about. And this is the frustrating thing, people. These are the type of people who have never touched an economics textbook in their life, and they kind of just base capitalism off of basically what they think it is. So here's what Ryan says.
So I know a lot of people's knee-jerk responses to discussions about capitalism is to declare that capitalism is the only system that works and move on.
This is also the problem. They don't understand economic history, and when you go through the entire period of history before the Industrial Revolution, collectivism dominated the planet and there was barely any improvement whatsoever. The most innovative time period in history was, of course, the Industrial Revolution. Capitalism is the only system that's ever worked, and you wouldn't say that the British Industrial Revolution was somehow capitalist. It was dominated by mercantilism. And of course you saw the imperialism, the colonialism, etc.
It can be deeply uncomfortable to entertain ideas that don't mesh with your worldview.
It's not so much that it would be uncomfortable. At the end of the day, I'm more than happy for people to have their own critique, and I can confidently say that I can challenge their views simply because history is on my side, as is economics.
Capitalism is a system in which the means of production, that is, the things that produce goods and services like factories, restaurants, hair salons, etc., are owned by individuals.
You'll notice that when these socialists try to define capitalism, they oversimplify the definition, and they like to have you believe that somehow this is the private ownership that you're living under today. What they completely ignore is the difference between true private ownership, which is what the definition of capitalism is really defining. That means a private sector left be to regulate itself. The private ownership that you have today is not true private ownership, and if the government strongly regulates the private sector, it's the government that pretty much owns it. After all, it's the government controlling the means of production. He wants you to believe it's the same thing. He wants you to believe that this is capitalism, and it's not. Capitalism is the separation of the economy from government. It does not mean this type of private sector you see today.
Socialism, by contrast, is a system in which the means of production are owned collectively by society.
The most common dictionary definition of socialism, and they always try to do this, they always try to say, oh, the dictionary doesn't matter. Oh, it does matter actually. It matters when you see the most common dictionary definition of socialism pointing to governmental ownership, and that's the definition of socialism that you've seen throughout recorded history.
Imagine you are rich. Now, it's in your best interest to invest your fortune so that you can keep making more money.
It's the way they tell it. Oh, he's rich, you shouldn't have to earn more money. Investment means you're creating more wealth for other people. If you invest in a company, for example, you're helping someone else, and that company in turn, in its presence, providing products, creates wealth for the people of society.
With this in mind, you decide to purchase a McDonald's franchise. In this example, means of production would be the restaurant and everything in it. Now, according to Fox Business, each year you own a McDonald's franchise location, it will net you an average of $150,000. Where does that money come from? Well, the short answer is your employees.
They could not even tell you what goes into the type of work involved with all these managers, etc. They don't even know what goes on behind closed doors, but they'll just base it on the assumption that they do nothing. He completely ignores the fact that the franchise itself exists, and the reason why there's so many branches of it across the country is not because of the employees the company owner employed, it's because of the business owner himself. He's been successful in branding the business and being able to branch out and spread it across and make it a successful thing. I don't agree with the minimum wage, but you're not supposed to raise the minimum wage anyway. It's the skilled jobs where you see higher pay, where you see workers' wages driving up. And the reason being is because there's competition.
Each employee produces more value than they are being paid. Otherwise, as a savvy business owner, why would you hire them? According to iBiz World, the average number of employees at a fast food restaurant is around 16. We'll be generous and assume that McDonald's has 20 employees per location. That means that each employee is generating an additional $7,500 a year that you, the owner, get to pocket. And that's just the cut that goes to the franchise owner.
He doesn't even take into account the overhead costs of running a business, of advertising, owning the building in the first place, the operation of one building, never let alone all the other franchises that they've got to take into account in terms of costs. And of course, that's not to say a rich person's wealth is all held within money. Much of it is held within assets.
McDonald's reported a net profit of over $6 billion last year. That means if it were divided up among their workers, it would work out to about $3,000 each. All of this means that the value generated by each employee that is siphoned off to franchise owners and shareholders, whose major contributions, let me remind you, was owning stuff, is upwards of $10,000 a year.
So what he doesn't acknowledge is the fact that the value has to be greater than that of the cost. So if someone came to your door and offered to basically paint your fence for $5 an hour, you may agree to that. Of course, the value for what you're getting is greater than that of your costs. If that was a case of $500 an hour, there's no way that you would employ them to paint that fence, because you could do it far cheaper yourself, and therefore the cost would be far greater than what the value is. This is no different with this of entry-level jobs. He doesn't get that. You think it's just a case of, oh, look at all the rich person's money, look at all the money they're getting, that should be just redistributed.
That's not even accounting for the fact that many of these are part-time employees, or the intrinsic inequality of the corporate structure where the people working office jobs get paid way more than the people doing physical labor in the restaurants.
How the bloody hell on earth did you get around to comparing office workers to that of mostly entry-level working in restaurants? Now, it depends if the person is a chef, and even then, people who work in office jobs, they're not all the same. To be working in IT would probably require greater skills than that of someone who is a waiter or waitress serving at tables in restaurants. I'm sorry to say that, it's the bloody truth.
This process of exploitation is called wage labor. And it means that as long as an individual owns the means of production, in this case the restaurant, the employees will not be given the full value of their labor.
Are you having a laugh? They're not even worth it. They're entry-level jobs. They're not worth $15 an hour. No one is worth $15 an hour for flipping $5 burgers. No one.
You may sometimes notice feelings of anger being directed towards billionaires.
Why am I not surprised why I've seen that of a guillotine? Again, it's really that thing. Looks at the whole thing to do with the capitalist. Oh, all people who are rich are all evil. All people who basically earn a lot of money and therefore they're not paying out their extremely high wages. That's how evil they are. They're evil for basically being efficient. Why even bring a guillotine into it? They're dangerous. They really are. You didn't see millions die in all these social regimes for nothing.
So when we see things like how Jeff Bezos has made $80 billion since the start of the pandemic, while millions of people are struggling to just keep a roof over their heads, glaring injustice of it can be just infuriating at times.
Yeah, the glaring injustice of all those millions of products, have cheap products and benefit from it. Oh, that injustice. You only see one side of the story. You don't even look at the other side of the story. The only thing that you stare at is the billions of pounds that, of course, Jeff Bezos makes. That's all you see. I can sympathise that there is a problem with exploitation by your definition today. And yes, there is socialising losses and privatising gains, which is not capitalism, as if to say that the presence of the company did nothing. It's if to say that they just earn money. Like to say, oh, Jeff Bezos just made all this money and oh, how evil of him. The glaring injustice. Here I am sitting making a video about capitalism and how evil it is, with a product I probably even bought from Amazon. all I can think about is how much the rich are earning, because I just can't see green cheese without having a bit.
Foundational to capitalism are the ideas that money can be used to measure someone's worth, and some people deserve more money than others.
Well, no shit, Sherlock. Are you actually surprised that some people deserve to get paid more than others? Of course they do. Some people work harder than others. Welcome to the real world.
Why is it irresponsible for a poor person to eat out at restaurants frequently, but not for a rich person? Most people, when presented with a question like this, give something about the necessity of living within your means.
Those rich people, that's not to say all of them, because I do understand that you do live in a corrupt system where you have your socialist subsidies that make rich people live at the expense of others, but that's not to say all rich people are like that. There is the presence of the socialist income tax. Oh, you didn't like that one. Your irresponsible actions pass off onto other hardworking people. That's why when people say that if you are someone who doesn't have the money and you're complaining, then they're telling you to be more responsible over your finances, to live within your means. That's what they're trying to say.
The extent to which capitalism produces innovation is secondary to its primary goal, monetization. If you are able to monetize without innovating, the system encourages you to do so. It seems much more likely to me that people would follow their creative passions and we would get all sorts of unique and interesting and thought-provoking content. Imagine what the video game industry would look like if developers weren't forced to just iterate on stale concepts with mass market appeal to make the money they need to live. I mean, instead of getting tons of tiny tweaks on popular formulas constantly regurgitated to us, we would get amazing creative gameplay experiences. The reason why we have more games like Call of Duty than Breath of the Wild, games like Call of Duty tend to be more profitable.
And there you have it. Again, a socialist who doesn't understand prices and has no clue what profits are. So in other words, profits is the information of consumers' needs and wants. So the very reason why Call of Duty is more profitable than that of the other games like Zelda is because that's what the consumers are spending most on.
And this is not to say that you should feel bad about liking series like Call of Duty or Assassin's Creed that are just churning out game after game, year after year. The developer's primary goal is not to create the most engaging and fun gameplay experience. It's to get you to pay the $60 to buy the dang thing as many times as they can.
In order for a company to even make a profit, and again, this is the corporatist system, but the company has to provide a service in order to gain the profits. Who says that the people that in the company aren't passionate of those games, aren't passionate of that industry?
While it's true that capitalism has led to more innovation than the system that we had prior to it, that system was feudalism, so it's a pretty low bar.
No, what is a low bar is for you to sit and claim that mercantilism is capitalism when it's not. Mercantilism dominated the 19th century, and then it moved from what was mercantilism towards modern day corporatism, which is basically anti-capitalism. Capitalism's the free market.
Capitalism isn't human nature. Capitalists tend to act like they have human nature just all figured out, but the philosophy of capitalism isn't rooted in scientific studies of human nature. It's rooted in assumptions that a bunch of wealthy European dudes just kind of came up with one time before the field of modern psychology existed. When people talk about behavior under capitalism and say, it's human nature that people will only work if they're getting paid.
And part of human nature that socialists do not like is self-interest. And that's something you always hear. Socialists always call people, oh, they're greedy, they're self-centered, therefore you cannot allow things to be to the free market because people are so greedy, etc., etc. In other words, that is to say, socialists don't have a very high opinion of human beings. However, when it comes to speaking about socialism, they put on all the emotions and say, oh, you don't need capitalism, we can all hold hands together and sing Kumbaya after I've just called you a greedy bastard. We can all... That's honestly the truth. They're so contradictory. On one hand, they'll say that you can't have a free market because you're a greedy bastard. But on the flip side of that, they're then saying that, oh well, you can all just come together and we're not greedy, and you see the point that I'm addressing here. He doesn't acknowledge that human nature is self-interested. In economic reality, people want to work for a living in terms of working for a wage. They do not want to work for free. Now, there are jobs, and I've stated this several times before and I'll say it again, there are jobs out there that need to be done, and those specific jobs are dangerous jobs, especially people who are electricians. You honestly think electricians seriously want to do their job for free? Are you having a laugh?
I would agree. Under capitalism, that behavior is pretty common. Doesn't mean that behavior would always be common regardless of the circumstances. Capitalism's understanding of human nature fails to account for the deeper needs of humanity that we now understand much better than we used to. Humans have emotional needs, like a sense of belonging and...
Economics doesn't give a sh about your feelings. Your feelings are meaningless. People are not going to work for free in dangerous jobs, in specific jobs that need to be done. You think that you can just have your intentions because, oh, I intend for things to be a specific given way because I feel it. I feel it. I feel that the minimum wage should be increased because it's my feelings. But guess what? The economic reality is your feelings are meaningless in the face of the consequences that follow. Take, for example, your intention to raise the minimum wage, which is a price floor. It's something that leads to lower skilled workers being paid off, so unemployment drives up, the cost of goods and services drives up, in other words, inflation, all in the name of paying for your so-called higher minimum wage, or of course, a reduction of working hours, so they're not working enough hours to make up for the minimum wage raise. All of these things happen. That's what we mean. Just because you've got good intentions and how you feel about something doesn't mean to say it turns out that way in practice. Your socialism would create extreme economic impoverishment. Oh, I care about you so much. I feel for all you hard-working people out there being exploited. Meanwhile, I've never touched an economics textbook in my life. I feel so much for you, so much so to the point that I stare in the face of the difference between North Korea and South Korea, and I stare straight past it. I care for you so much that I stare at the history of Venezuela during a period of the oil boom and notice that in 2003 there was a food shortage crisis. I care about you so much that during the Second World War, when in the United States there was rent controls, there ended up being a housing shortage crisis. So what I did was I brushed it under the carpet because my socialism means more to me than economic reality and facts.
Discovery and social engagement and feelings of contributing to the community that can all motivate people to work.
It's all that thing again about feelings and, oh, it feels so good. It doesn't matter how you feel, because a contribution denotes that it's voluntary action, because the entire basis of your entire socialism is not based on voluntary action, son. Voluntary action is what we call charity.
What kinds of amazing inventions and discoveries could humanity be capable of if we just committed to meeting every individual's basic needs?
Yes, let's speak about fulfilling every individual's basic needs. Meanwhile, we'll ignore the very fact that every individual are all different from one another, and we all have different needs and wants. We'll just ignore the fact that everybody is all different from one another, and we'll completely ignore economic reality. Whatever could go wrong there? What's wrong with ignoring economic reality? Economic reality, we'll just completely stare past it like it just doesn't exist, and we'll ignore its scarcity. But whatever could go wrong there?
In fact, I don't even really believe that laziness exists. Only unseen barriers.
Of course laziness exists. Your socialism created it.
Capitalism is bad for society. The last thing that I want to touch on about capitalism is that the system completely focuses on individuals, and in doing so, it kind of misses the bigger picture.
Of course, capitalism concentrates on the individuals. It's because every single individual of society all have their different tastes. They all have different needs and wants. It's not one size fits all. In the free market, it allows people to choose and go directly to what they want and get what they want. You don't want to do that. You wish to place everybody in one big collective group, and it requires the central planner, by the way, and you think that this central planner somehow knows better about people's needs and wants than that of society does individually.
Capitalism views the world strictly in terms of economic producers and consumers.
Oh, all this materialism that left people in want. Oh, the materialism was so evil. Let's go back to living like we did in the caveman days.
It makes the assumption that if something is good for the producer and good for the consumer, then it must be good for society as a whole.
Are you honestly trying to tell me all that innovation, all that production over the past 20 to 30 odd years was not good for the consumer? If you're honestly trying to tell me that people today are not technologically living better off with better living standards today than what they were 30 to 40 odd years ago, you're having a laugh. You take, for example, something as simple as the smartphone. I remember a time when people struggled to get in contact with other people, and even before the invention of the internet.
Capitalism encourages something called an externalization of costs. Externalizing a cost is when you jettison as much of the cost of production of a product as possible onto society as a whole rather than just paying it as an individual. Like, for example, part of the cost to society of creating, Oreos is an increase in the number of cavities that people are likely to develop.
I would agree that there's a problem in today's corporatist system with things like that of Monsanto and what they've been able to get away with. The individual goes out and chooses what they buys that product, in this case, Oreos, and eats those, products. And if it creates cavities, if it creates problems with their teeth, whose fault was that? That isn't the fault of the business. So in other words, it's down to your own individual responsibility. And that is something that you socialists don't want to take. You socialists continuously want to project the blame off elsewhere. Anyway, folk, I hope it's been educational enough for yourself. If you've got anything you would like to add yourself, comment in the comment section below. And of course, I shall be sure to get back to you. Thank you for watching, and I shall talk to you later. Cheers.